Well, good evening. Although, obviously, for people over there in America, might just be coming into afternoon time. So yes, afternoon America. Good evening UK. Just before, in case I forget, you'll notice that I've got my email address there. So if anybody ever needed to get hold of me to do with making a murder stuff, then that's the one to get me on. Somebody was concerned that I got other emails. I've got several email addresses, so there's no panic there. Now, what I wanted to share with you today was a nice little article that I found. We mentioned on Saturday that the Netflix documentary Innocence is coming out. I don't know if this refers or some of these cases in Baltimore are going to be listed in the are going to be documented in the upcoming documentary. We'll have to wait and see. But anyway, let's just crack on with the article because I thought it was an excellent article, and it deals with some of the Adnan Syed case, and there's a particularly interesting, rather irritating comment by Darrell Massey, one of the investigators in the case. Anyway, if I click on that one, hopefully we should be able to get that to do that, and we can go straight to this one, and I'll just make sure that everything's working fine on the channel. As you can see, hopefully it's come up with that. Yeah, there we go. It's come up on the screen. I'm always a bit apprehensive with this modern technology. So this is an article from the Appeal. We start off with a picture of this gentleman, Jerome Johnson, and his attorney, Nancy Foster, in July 2018. And this is an article that came out just a couple of days back by Amelia McDonnell Parry, second. Title: Did Baltimore cops conspire to suppress evidence leading to a wrongful murder conviction? Let's carry on. Attorneys for a man exonerated in a Baltimore murder say detectives suppressed exculpatory evidence and that the police's homicide unit has a pattern and practice of similar conduct in decades of cases. Jerome L. Johnson was exonerated and released from prison in July 2018 after serving nearly 30 years for a 1988 murder in Baltimore, a crime of which he had long maintained his innocence. According to a federal civil rights lawsuit filed on March 6th, Johnson alleges that homicide detectives from the Baltimore Police Department suppressed exculpatory evidence and pressured the prosecution's star witness into giving false testimony, unconstitutional conduct that was sanctioned by the department's customs, policies, and practices. The lawsuit cites a dozen other cases to support its claim that the homicide unit has a sufficiently widespread and long-standing pattern and practice of suppressing exculpatory and impeachment evidence. In the early morning hours of July 14th, 1988, four men chased Aaron Taylor from a northwest Baltimore basketball court to a bar called the Night Owl. One man in the group shot Taylor to death. A 15-year-old girl, known only as LS, positively identified Alvin Hill as the killer, not Johnson. The interview with LS was written in a police report that was approved by a supervisor, Detective Kevin Davis. But according to Johnson's lawsuit, the report was never turned over to the state's attorney's office. In an interview with the detectives after his arrest, Johnson asserted his innocence and provided them with the name of a witness who could account for his whereabouts at the time of Taylor's murder. He also told them that he had a conversation with an officer working that night who could corroborate other aspects of his account. But the homicide detectives on the case, Davis, Frank Barlow, Daniel Boone, and Gerald Goldstein, never investigated the truthfulness of Johnson's alibi or interviewed the officer, according to Johnson's lawsuit. Instead, Johnson claims in his lawsuit the four detectives wrongly decided that he killed Taylor, conspired to suppress the July 14th interview with Ellis, as well as other exculpatory and impeachment evidence, and then selectively disclosed evidence that conformed to their narrative that Johnson was guilty. We are conducting our due diligence concerning the allegations in the lawsuit. Andre Davis, Baltimore City's solicitor and Baltimore Police Legal Counsel, told the appeal. In 1989, Johnson was tried and convicted of murder and was sentenced to life plus 20 years. In 2011, he uncovered the police report in which Ellis identified Hill as Taylor's killer. But 7 years would pass before the Baltimore State's Attorney Office exonerated him. During his time in prison, Johnson suffered life-threatening injuries at the hands of other prisoners, missed the funerals of his father and mother, and was unable to raise his only child. I spent so much of my life in prison for something I didn't do, Johnson said in a statement after the lawsuit was filed. We can't go back and change the past, but I hope that there is justice at the end of this road. A history of misconduct. Johnson's claims of misconduct by homicide detectives are not unusual in Baltimore, where numerous murder convictions have been overturned, most often because police and prosecutors suppressed exculpatory or impeachment evidence. The Baltimore Police Department has a demonstrated history of misconduct and violating people's constitutional rights. Kobe Flowers, one of Johnson's attorneys, said in a phone interview, "These people tend to be poor people and people of color. We are suing in Jerome Johnson's case, but there are ongoing criminal investigations. Just this month, we got the indictment of former Sergeant Keith Gladstone in connection with the federal investigation into the Gun Trace Task Force. After the death of Freddie Gray, BPD, Baltimore Police Department, was placed under a consent decree because all of the constitutional violations that the police department had been involved in. So I don't think anybody should be surprised. I am hopeful that the consent decree and the criminal indictments and the civil complaints all will work together to ultimately change the culture of the Baltimore Police Department. As a lawyer, I don't know what other options we have on the table aside from suing them, criminally charging them, and then also having them be involved in a civil consent decree. I don't know what else is out there that we can do. Johnson's lawsuits cites a dozen other wrongful convictions stretching back to the 1960s, in which misconduct by Baltimore homicide detectives was a significant contributing factor. In 1968, Walter Lomax was convicted and sentenced to life in prison for the fatal shooting of a food market's manager. Critical evidence was not disclosed to Lomax's trial counsel, including a police report in which an eyewitness identified someone else as the gunman. Lomax served nearly 40 years in prison before he was exonerated in 2014 after a reinvestigation by a conviction integrity unit established in 2011 by then State's Attorney Greg Bernstein. I'll be honest with you, for many, many years, I just thought, well, maybe those people really just thought I was the person and misidentified me, Lomax told the appeal. I never, in my wildest imagination, thought that I had actually been framed for those charges. But Lomax says that the Conviction Integrity Unit's revelations about misconduct in his case changed his mind. I wasn't there as a victim of circumstance or just by chance. There was a concentrated plot. The Conviction Integrity Unit found that homicide detectives withheld or misplaced numerous pieces of exculpatory evidence, including police reports containing witness descriptions that did not match Lomax, and a photo identification made by a witness who was never called to testify in court, presumably because the person did not identify Lomax. Next section, issues emerge with homicide detectives. In 1988, James Owens was convicted of burglary and felony murder in a murder, rape and robbery based on the testimony of his neighbour, James Thompson, who had confessed to participating in the crime. In 2007, Owens won a new trial after Thompson recanted, and new DNA testing proved neither he nor Thompson had raped the victim. Owens also learned that detectives Jerry J. Landsman, Thomas Pellegrini, and Gary Dunnigan suppressed Thompson's initial statement denying any involvement in the crime, as well as evidence that he changed his account on more than 5 occasions. Owens was held in prison an additional 16 months, awaiting a retrial until Baltimore prosecutors dropped the charges in 2008. In 2018, Owens settled a lawsuit against the Baltimore police and 3 of its detectives for $9 million. When his case was heard before the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit, the judges concluded that the officers' omissions were not accidental, but intentional and malicious. Landsman, Pellegrini and Dunnigan were featured in David Simon's 1991 book Homicide, A Year on the Killing Streets, which was then adapted into the popular TV show Homicide, Life on the Street. Landsman was also the name of the character on The Wire, Simon's other critically acclaimed television dramatization of Baltimore police. Several other detectives featured in Simon's book also had issues with disclosing exculpatory evidence. On March the 8th, 1982, Wendell Griffith was convicted for the 1981 murder of James Williams Wise, and also for a related weapons charge. He was sentenced to life in prison, but thanks to a 2011 public records request, he learned that witnesses provided inconsistent statements that detectives Donald Kincaid, Edward Brown, and Jay Landsman never disclosed. They also withheld several witness statements and a photo array, including Griffin, as well as other evidence indicating that someone else committed the crime. Griffin was freed in 2012 after prosecutors agreed to modify his sentence to time served. In 2014, Sabian Burgess had his conviction for his girlfriend's murder overturned after he proved that homicide detectives, including Goldstein, an investigator in Johnson's case, and Detective Robert Patton, withhold exculpatory witness statements, including evidence pointing to an alternate suspect. According to the Baltimore Sun, Goldstein responded to the Burgess wrongful conviction lawsuit by saying he still had absolutely no doubt he was guilty. In 2017, however, a jury awarded $15 million to Burgess. Patton also withheld eyewitness statements and other exculpatory evidence, which led to the 1995 murder conviction of Antoine Pettiford, who was cleared 5 years later. So, Serial shines a light on homicide unit tactics. Johnson's civil rights lawsuit also reveals how several exonerations share the same homicide detectives who repeatedly engaged in misconduct. Detectives William Ritz and Stephen Lehman worked the Burgess case, as well as the 1999 conviction of Malcolm Bryant in the killing of a 16-year-old girl. In 2016, Bryant was exonerated after the discovery of undisclosed witnesses and witness statements. Another detective, Greg McGilvery, is tied to the wrongful convictions of Rodney Addison, that's overturned in 2005, and Gareth Parks, which was overturned in 2015. In 1999, McGilvery and Ritz led the investigation into what has become one of the most notorious homicide cases in Baltimore history: the disappearance and murder of high school student Haymin Lee, and the arrest and conviction of her ex-boyfriend, Adnan Syed. In 2014, doubts were raised about Syed's 2000 conviction after more than 80 million people downloaded the first season of the Serial podcast, which examined the case. The discovery of previously undisclosed evidence and ineffective representation by his trial counsel resulted in Syed's conviction being overturned in 2016. Instead of pursuing a new trial or dropping the charges, the Maryland Attorney General's office appealed the ruling for nearly 3 years. On March 8th, the Court of Appeals reinstated Syed's conviction. Having exhausted his appeals, Syed's recent and most successful relief efforts have focused on post-conviction claims like ineffective assistance of counsel and prosecutorial misconduct. But the investigation conducted by McGilvery, Ritz, and Detective Darrell Massey can be scrutinized, and has been, by Serial producer and host Sarah Koenig, and the podcast Undisclosed, thanks to the public disclosure of police files. The Syed files reveal that the homicide detectives had lengthy, unrecorded pre-interviews with the prosecution's star witness and avoided interviewing witnesses who might have supplied exculpatory statements. On March the 10th, 2 days after Syed's conviction was reinstated, HBO debuted a 4-part docuseries called The Case Against Adnan Syed that picks up where Serial left off and reveals new evidence, including multiple conflicting accounts from a key witness, that further taints the integrity of his conviction. The docuseries finale aired on March 31st. Detective Darrell Massey, who has had a few of his own cases overturned because of integrity issues, participated in the series. His interviews project an unflappable confidence in the homicide unit's tactics, despite its legacy of wrongful convictions. Back in the 90s, Baltimore homicide was known across the country for the ability to clear cases, Massey brags in episode 1. Later, he notes that homicide detectives can safely clear a case when they have 51% confidence that the suspect under arrest is guilty of the crime. Convincing a jury to be 100% certain is up to the prosecutors. Clearance rate focus makes injustices. Massey's comments reflect the Baltimore Police's long-held focus on arrest statistics as the primary metric for success. But arrests and cleared cases don't necessarily result in convictions, let alone justice for the actual perpetrators. That's alarming anywhere, but for decades, Baltimore has had a murder rate that is among the nation's highest, and the police consume over $400 million from taxpayers every year, not including overtime costs, both legitimate and fraudulent, in the name of fighting crime. Despite its outsized budget, the department has lagged behind in implementing new case management technologies that would reduce the likelihood of discovery violations. According to Johnson's lawsuit, an internal assessment conducted in January 2000 found that Baltimore homicide detectives kept case folders in abysmal condition, that is, when they can be located, and lacked appropriate processes and protocols for recording information gathered in the course of their investigations. Now, homicide and other detective units manage their cases using Lotus Notes software that was ahead of its time when it was developed in the 1970s. The long list of constitutional violations alleged in Johnson's lawsuit can be partly attributed to decades of inadequate training and unclear standards for complying with evidence disclosure obligations. But the suppression of exculpatory evidence over so many decades and cases points to something more sinister inside the Baltimore Police Department, a win at any costs approach to the crime of murder that destroys the innocent and allows the guilty to walk free. There's a fundamental problem with policing, but also the entire criminal justice system. Flowers, one of Johnson's attorneys, told the appeal, "It's really a cultural change that has to happen. Most police departments train their police officers to be warriors with an us against them mentality, as opposed to guardians where it's we are them." So anyway, that's I thought that was an excellent article. I just wanted to share that with you. As usual, you always see parallels with other cases. I find that quite interesting. It'll be interesting to see how much the civil suit ends up being, whether they whether they get a big settlement. What's that? 5 years ago, somebody got 15 million. It just means that with inflation, could be even more. But as I say, what I also found interesting was the fact that they were quoting in this civil suit other cases, saying there's a failure here. It's something systemic, it would appear. Anyway, pleased to tell you that I've had some more correspondence from Fleetside. Very interesting article. I'm in the process of sharing it with one or two other people to get them to have a look at it and come back with their thoughts. So hopefully I shall be able to report back to Fleetside and say, this is what other people have thought about what you've written down. It's really quite good how over the I would say the last couple of months, Fleetside got in touch, McGilla got in touch. I managed to get hold of Rob Bellin, as you saw last night. More and more people coming on board. Netflix is one of its trending programs is still Making a Murderer, and hopefully sometime this week Rob Bellin will catch up on episode 2 and give us his assessment of that. In the meantime, one bit of news: Eric Jose is wanting people to record themselves singing along to "The Truth Train" by Stacey Seabrook. What to do is to have it playing on one medium, headphones, sing along, record it, send it into him. He's trying to put together a video of "The Truth Train" by Stacey Seabrook with lots of people singing along with it. And the more the better, because we really don't want Eric Jose to be the main singer in The Truth Train, much as he thinks he's a singer. But some of us know very differently. Okay, so that's one bit of news. Obviously, not long now till Marathon. But anyway, as usual, drop your comments below, and I'm sure you'll be able to find that article, and I'll probably put the link It won't be in the description now because the description has already been done, but I'll put it in the comments below. Okay. So anyway, thanks for joining in. We'll see you again soon. It's goodbye from him, and it's goodbye from me. Bye for now.